Today, we're diving into a history that was almost completely erased, a history of indigenous gender identity that existed long, long before our modern binary world. And honestly, it's a story that might just change how you see gender itself. For most of us, we're taught that gender is pretty simple. You're either male or you're female. But what if that was never the whole story? What if that's actually a pretty new idea? One that was forced on a world that was way more diverse?
So let's start with a really important term you've probably heard, two-spirit. Now, the term itself is actually modern. It was adopted back in 1990. But it's this powerful, unifying way to reclaim a tradition that's ancient. It's an English term, and that was intentional, created to bring different tribes together and describe individuals who are seen as being blessed with both a male and a female spirit.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock. Before European colonization, hundreds of tribes all across the continent didn't just recognize a wide spectrum of gender identities, they honored it. This wasn't some kind of exception, it was a fundamental part of so many cultures. And two-spirit people weren't just, accepted. They were revered. They held absolutely essential roles in their communities, as healers, as seers, as keepers of sacred traditions. They were celebrated for their unique skills and spiritual insight in everything from matchmaking and weaving to even hunting and combat. And if you want to understand just how widespread this was, think about this for a second. We know of more than 65 different indigenous languages that had specific words for people living outside of that strict male-female binary. So yeah, this was not some fringe concept. It was deeply woven into the fabric of cultures all over the continent. All right, let's make this a little more concrete. Here, we're looking at the traditional territory of the Chumash people, who have lived for thousands of years along the coast of what we now call California. Now, within Chumash society, there were individuals they called the Aki. This was their term for a third gender. And the Aki weren't just tolerated, they were seen as deeply valued members of the community. They had vital social and spiritual roles and were considered essential to the balance of their world. And this cultural diversity wasn't just limited to the north, not by a long shot. If we head further south inside the borders of modern-day Mexico, you had this incredible number of indigenous nations, each with their own unique traditions. A really powerful, and I mean living, breathing example of this comes from the Zapotec people of Oaxaca. They recognize a third gender known as muxes. And this isn't just a historical footnote. It's a vibrant, thriving identity today, celebrated with huge festivals in Oaxaca and even in big U.S. cities like Los Angeles. But this world of rich gender diversity came into direct and violent conflict with the arrival of Europeans. The colonization wasn't just about taking land. It was about imposing a completely new, rigid social and spiritual order on people. And what followed was a systematic campaign of erasure. European settlers, government agents, missionaries, they all deliberately targeted these traditions. They persecuted non-binary people, they forced children into residential boarding schools designed to strip them of their culture, and they demanded conversion to Christianity as a tool to force assimilation. This violence was often horrifyingly specific. The Chumash scholar Deborah Miranda actually uses the term gendercide to describe how Spanish colonizers deliberately targeted the Akui for complete elimination. It was a strategy. You destroy a people by destroying one of their genders. So how do they enforce this erasure? Well, one of the key tools was the casta painting. It was this visual system used by the Spanish to classify and rank every single person based entirely on their ancestry. It was a brutal way to impose order, and that order included not just a strict racial hierarchy, but a strict gender binary too. And this system, it just gets more and more detailed and absurd. At the very top, of course, is someone of pure Spanish blood. But as you go down, the classifications for mixed-race people become incredibly insulting. You get names like Lobo, which means wolf, or even No te entiendo, which literally translates to I don't understand you. It was a system designed from top to bottom to enforce colonial power. But, and this is so important, despite centuries of this violence and suppression, these traditions were not lost forever. A story of resistance, of reawakening, was just getting started. So starting in the 1960s, you have Native American activists who begin digging up this suppressed knowledge. This eventually led to the creation of the term two-spirit in the late 80s, which was then officially adopted in 1990. And that was a really strategic choice. to have an English term that could unite hundreds of different tribes under a shared language of identity and cultural reclamation. This reawakening has also kicked off a much broader conversation about identity. So you'll hear terms like Chikanx being used to recognize indigenous heritage. Some people prefer Sikax, with an X, to intentionally use an indigenous pronunciation. And the term Indigenous Latinx is there to honor people who maintain those direct connections to their specific tribal nations, like the Maya or the Zapotec.
Okay, so why is this history so critical for us to understand today? What does it all mean in the context of all our current conversations about identity?
Well, when it comes right down to it, for indigenous communities, reclaiming terms like Two-Spirit is about so much more than gender expression or who you love. It's really about reconnecting with a profound spiritual and historical heritage that was deliberately attacked and almost wiped out. This quote it really gets to the heart of it all. It powerfully reframes the entire discussion, and it reminds us that the modern fight for gender fluidity isn't about inventing some radical new thing.
In so many ways, it's a return to traditions and ways of understanding the world that are deeply, deeply rooted in this land. It's a fight to reclaim a past that was stolen. So I'll leave you with this to think about. How does knowing this history change how we see identity today?